Hello everyone, Golden Nova here. Last week we covered the Knights of the Stars, Constellars. Today, we'll talk about the bearers of their shining legacy, Tellarknights. Premiering in the August 2014 core set, Duelist Alliance, these monsters are the literal descendants of the Constellars, inheriting the power of their forebears from Constellar Sombre, who had gained all their power from fusing with their compatriots. And it was none too soon, might I add, as the Shaddoll threat was gearing up and the heroes needed all the help they could get against this looming presence. So let's go over the lights that shine upon the darkness, examine all the different overlayers of our strategy, then find some friends with a passion for astronomy. It's time to connect the stars with Tellarknights. So what's the deal with Tellarknights? Well, they're a series of level 4 light attribute warrior type monsters that sought to take Xyz summoning to the next level. As that extra deck summoning method's representative in the post-Duelist Alliance world, their focus was on chaining a number of summons together to make powerful bosses quickly, cheaply, and easily. To that end, all of our main deck monsters have effects that trigger on summon. Normal, special, flip, it doesn't matter, whenever we field them, we get ourselves a little extra bonus. But where Constellars had tools to branch out into several different ranks, Tellarknights are much more focused. They're really good at putting out rank 4s, but not much else. Oh, and a point of order because this tripped me up when they first came out, the theme is largely split between the main deck Satellarknights and the extra deck Stellarknights, though there are some exceptions both ways. But since most everything just checks for Tellarknights, it's just a flavor distinction. I'd like to start by going over what I feel like are the 3 core Tellarknights, the ones that make up your bread and butter plays, and that work exceedingly well together. Satellarknight Vega has 1200 attack and 1600 defense, and if they're summoned, you can special summon a Tellarknight monster from your hand, except a copy of itself. Satellarknight Altair has 1700 attack and 1300 defense, and if summoned, you can target a Tellarknight monster in your grave, except a copy of itself, and special summon it in defense position, though it locks you into only attacking with Tellarknight monsters for the rest of the turn. And the brightest star in the constellation is Satellarknight Deneb. They have 1500 attack and 1000 defense, and when summoned, you can add a Tellarknight monster from your deck to your hand. The ideal play sequence is to summon either Vega or Altair, use that effect to summon the other, then round things up with Deneb. That way you end with 3 material on board and a search for a Tellarknight to set you up for your next turn. And you'll be leading with either Altair or Vega, depending on where all your pieces are. So like I said, the Vega Altair Deneb is kind of your basic combo, but that last slot with Deneb can be replaced with a variety of utility Satellarknights that we'll be covering from this point on. You should aim to play out this sequence as often as possible because the advantage it gives you over time is fantastic, and puts you in a position to either make a few Xyz monsters or one really tall one. Either way, you know that these warriors are made of tougher stuff. Or rather, tougher material? Satellarknight Alsame has 1400 attack and 1800 defense, and if summoned, can inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. This is certainly a nifty endgame option. Using this to cap off a long line of summons while you already have the resources you need can help put your opponent in kill range, or at the very least help set up your success later on. And with time rules being as strict as they are, it's nice to have a little something in your pocket to help tip the life point count in your favor, especially because this also makes for excellent Gaga cowboy material. Sure, it may be a cheap way to grab a win, but I do like the poetry of the bow and arrow leading into the firearm, all in an evolutionary line of absolutely tilting your opponent. Satellarknight Beetlejuice has 700 attack and 1900 defense, and if summoned, you can target a Tellarknight card in your grave, except a copy of itself, send this card to the grave, and if you do, add that target to your hand. Interesting little bit of swapsies going on here, letting you recall an important card from your grave for later use. But this is almost exclusively useful at the end of your Vega Altair line, and nowhere else. If you just summoned it by itself, great, you have no monsters on board now. If you summoned it with just Vega or Altair, then you're stuck with a single monster. But if it's your third summon, then at the very least you have 2 material left over to make an Xyz monster with. It's a bit situational. We'll likely be playing cards that not only recycle more efficiently, but put them into play quicker, but if you need to squeeze that last bit of juice out of your deck, this is how you do it. Satellar Knight Capella has 1100 attack and 2000 defense, and if this card is summoned, you can apply the following effects for the rest of the turn. You can treat level 4 or lower Tellar Knight monsters you control as level 5 when Xyz summoning using 3 or more monsters as material. This effect can only be used once per turn, but you can apply that effect as many times as you want over the course of a turn. This helps you break out of your usual level 4 comfort zone, but only if you're making things that need 3 or more material, and this means you have some very limited options. If we don't count Chaos Xyz monsters that require their base forms to reach their full potential, we're limited to Digvorjak, which I guess is some kind of removal. Number 53, Heart Earth, it's not even the dragon form, and even if it was, I don't make my videos incorporating NR format into the mix. Doom Chimera Dragon, which is the most playable out of all our options. Paradise Smasher, which... okay. Stellar Knight Constellar Diamond, which we have much easier ways to access. And Ultimate Utopia Ray, both the Leo and Dragonic versions, which in turn require ZW cards to really take advantage of. As such, I deem Capella to be the most forgettable member of the team, until such times as a worthy rank 5 is printed. Capella looks really skilled at reining things in, but probably could have left a little slack for its effect. Satellar Knight Procyon has 1300 attack and 1200 defense, and if this card is summoned, you can send a Tellar Knight monster from your hand to the grave, and if you do, draw a card. Hey, that's pretty cool. The filtering is quite nice and can set up Altair's grave summoning effect for later. And we've got a lot of off-theme cards we want to dig for, though this does feel like a bit of a misplaced effect. If this ends up being the last card in your summon chain, you're either out of options, in which case top decking doesn't put you in a good position, none of the options you have are pretty good, in which case, see previous example, or third, you're already so ahead that a draw doesn't really change anything. Still, I'd rather have this option to have around just in case, and on the off chance the filter top decks you into the right card, it's gonna feel like a real Procyon gamer move. Satellar Knight Rigel has 1900 attack and 700 defense, and if summoned, you can target a Tellar Knight monster on the field, and it gains 500 attack, but send it to the grave during the end phase. This means you can give your Tellar Knights a bit of an offensive boost to get in some chip damage, and the best part is, this only sends during the end phase, so you still have all of main phase 2 to Xyz summon with it, so it doesn't get wasted. The attack boost might make it sound like a middling card, and in most cases it kind of is, but I have to give credit where credit is due. Rigel actually saw some use as a tech pick as an out to El Shaddoll Winda. That's right, normal summon Rigel, give the boost to itself, and it's sitting pretty at 2400. It's a pretty rash move, but I've gotta respect the ingenuity. It's a real Rigel or die situation with this one. Satellar Knight Sirius has 1600 attack and 900 defense, and if summoned, you can target 5 Tellar Knight monsters in your grave and on resolution, shuffle all 5 back into the deck, then draw a card. This is key to your late game grind, as it's effectively a Pot of Avarice for the theme. You get to recycle a whole mess of cards, including your Xyz, and get a little draw for your trouble. But like Pot of Avarice, this is very easy to interrupt. If even one of the targeted cards gets banished or moved or anything like that, the whole effect fails, and well, anyone who sat across from a Tirashizu deck knows the pain of that. Now, this might seem pretty petty, but this monster is a stickler for rules. You could say they're very serious about it. Satellar Knight Anukalai has 1800 attack and 1000 defense, and if summoned, you can send a Tellar Knight card from your deck to the grave, except a copy of itself. This is an absolutely incredible piece to the puzzle, as Knuckles here can load the grave with a variety of utility Tellar Knights to be revived by Altair later. But since you can also send spells and traps, you can shed bad top decks, or recover them with Beetlejuice. Now, it might seem a little macabre to have your whole purpose be to throw your comrades and their spells into the grave, but considering what happens to Anukalai, it kinda fits. Now, we're gonna do another section where we cover more than one Tellar Knight, for reasons that'll become apparent rather quickly. Satellar Knight Zephyr Thubin is a pendulum monster that has 0 attack and 2100 defense with a scale of 1. Stellar Knight Zefraxiton is a fiend pendulum, that's different, with 1900 attack and 0 defense and a scale of 7. They have identical pendulum effects, preventing you from pendulum summoning except to summon Tellar Knight and Zephyr monsters. And if they're normal, flip, or pendulum summoned, you can target one of your other Tellar Knight or Zephyr cards in your monster zone or pendulum zone, and a face-up card your opponent controls for Thubin, or a set card for Zefraxiton, and destroy them. And here's Zephyr again. For those of you who don't remember, they're an archetype from the late Dual Terminal lore that take members from other established archetypes and tries to make a whole new archetype out of them, while still kind of allowing them to work with their base theme to varying degrees of success. Thuban and Exciton are actually fairly unique, as they're forms of direct removal that you don't normally have in the theme, but there is a problem. Your non-Zephyr Tellarknights trigger on any kind of summon, but while these two will still trigger on normal or flip, they preclude generic special summoning. It has to be pendulums. Now, you could just scale these to give you a form of repeatable removal by summoning these two back over and over again, but now that we're past Master Rule 4, our back row is at even more of a premium, and as it stands now, Pendulum is very unwieldy to use for the base theme. You could also just normal summon these monsters, but that foregoes long chains of summons, and because you have to target a different card, you can't just have it blow itself up, and normal summoning the zero attack Thuban might be a bad idea. These probably still belong as utility one-ofs to help with spot removal, just don't expect too many of them to tip the scales in your favor. And now we have some stellar new additions. Tellarknight Altea has 1700 attack and 1300 defense, and is always treated as a Constellar card. If this card is summoned, you can target cards on the field up to the number of Light and Dark Xyz monsters you control and destroy them. And if any number of Tellarknight and or Constellar monsters other than copies of this card are special summoned to your field, you can special summon this card from your grave, but also you can't declare an attack for the rest of the turn except with Xyz monsters. So it's basically a reverse Altair. It doesn't summon other monsters out of the grave, rather it summons itself from the grave, but only triggers on special summons, so you don't get it for free off of generic normal summons. But special summoning monsters is kinda what we're meant to do here, so I don't think that'll be a problem. This extra material takes some of the burden off your bread and butter combos, as now you need only Vega or Altair to get 3 material, and boy howdy is this gonna be a great target for a Knuckle Eye. The removal ain't too bad either, it just gives you some pops if you have established Light or Dark Xyz monsters. Insofar as Constellars are concerned, this can work with basically all of them if you have Kaus on hand to modulate its level, though it'll work best with Algieti since they're already level 4. Now, bit of trivia here, the reason Altea seems similar to Altair is that it's likely an updated version of Altair, complete with an alternate costume. Tellarknight Lyra has 1200 attack and 1600 defense, and like Altea is always treated as a Constellar. If any number of Tellarknight and or Constellar monsters other than a copy of this card are normal summoned to your field, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if this card is summoned, you can add a Tellarknight spell card from your deck to your hand. So just like we had a new version of Altair, this is our new Vega, but it's a bit easier to trigger because it's on normal summon, though because it summons itself from the hand, it's a bit less repeatable. It also advances your game plan instead of dismantling your opponents, and while a lot of our spells are a bit suspect, keep an eye out for Skybridge, it's pretty helpful. And that's no Lyra. Alright, that does it for our main deck monsters. Now it's time for our big payoffs, the Xyz. Stellar Knight Delteros is a rank 4 monster with 2500 attack and 2100 defense, requiring 3 level 4 monsters as material. While this card has Xyz material, your opponent can't activate cards or effects when you normal or special summon any number of monsters. Once per turn, you can detach an Xyz material from this card, then target a card on the field and destroy it. And if this card is sent from the field to the grave, you can special summon a Tellarknight monster from your hand or deck. This is part of the reason why you want to be pulling off your staple combo as often as possible, as you really do need a lot of material to get what amounts to even our most basic boss monster. And it's kinda strong. While it's not able to prevent the negation of normal or special summons, it does keep your opponent from triggering cards like Torrential Tribute or Bottomless, and keeps your opponent from interfering with any effects that you trigger on those kinds of summons. This basically makes your Tellarknight safer, and thus, your lines of play more insulated. The removal is nice, and the floating effect can easily reset all the material you need to remake this in one go, because it can, by itself, activate your staple combo. It even works when being sent to the grave for a Link summon, so if you run out of material, you can just reset it to really Delta roast your opponent. Stellar Knight Trivor is a rank 4 monster with 2100 attack and 2500 defense, requiring 3 level 4 Tellarknight monsters as material. During the turn you Xyz summon this card, you can't special summon monsters except Tellarknight monsters. If this card is Xyz summoned, you return all other cards on the field to the hand. And once per turn, you can detach an Xyz material from this card to send a random card from your opponent's hand to the grave. And if this card with Xyz material is sent to the grave, you can target a Tellarknight monster in your grave and special summon it. Now, Delteros was strong, but Trivor is frightening. It's a non-targeting board wipe bounce that can absolutely tear apart an opponent's field, and let's just say you play a lot of cards that take advantage of this. It's a good thing Premature Burial isn't legal at time of recording, or this would be patently obnoxious. Now, the Tellarknight lock on this card does limit our options. Annoyingly, it's one of those that checks before you even do it, but new support means more cards to work within that lock. And the floating from grave effect can also help you rebuild. The big downside here is the random sending from hand effect. Thankfully, it is Ascend, so it won't trigger cards like Dangers or Dark Worlds, but anything that triggers when being sent to the grave, either by an effect or in general, that's still potentially a problem for you. Heck, this was an issue when it was printed. Hitting a Shaddoll or a Burning Abyss would turn this into a huge mistake, and that's only gotten worse, with Tirashizu making the second appearance in this video. Still, everything else about this card is a huge bop that's perfect for when your opponents gotta bounce. Tellarknight Ptolemaeus is a rank 4 monster with 550 attack and 2600 defense, requiring 2 or more level 4 monsters as material. Once per chain during either player's turn, you can detach 3 material from this card to special summon from your extra deck 1 Xyz monster that is 1 rank higher than this card, except a number monster, by using this face-up card you control as the Xyz material, transferring all material over to it. You can also detach 7 material from this card to skip your opponent's next turn. And during each player's end phase, you can attach a Stellar Knight card from your extra deck to this card as a face-up Xyz material. Note that this is one of the few instances where it specifies Satellar Knights, so generally it's going to be your Xyz monsters and Zafraxiton. Ah, my powers of prognostication made manifest. So this card was primarily used as a bridge to access other monsters. In general, the 2 big options were Satellar Knight Constellar Diamond, a card we'll get into later, but suffice it to say, required any 2 level 4 material to go into, or if you could stack 3 of those under it, you could go into Cyber Dragon Nova, and from there, Infinity. This would, however, inevitably lead to this card's banning. Something that hilariously had nothing to do with its turn-skipping effect, because that one is basically impossible to resolve. But due to my amazingly well-researched, reasoned, and rational video on the subject, this card has been relieved of its ban list status, because, funnily enough, those plays are just not as effective as they used to be, though it is nice for anyone trying to access Diamond. So give it up to Centaur Daddy here, I'm sure they've got great things ahead in the future. Dark Tellarknight Botlemias is a rank 4 Dark Attribute Xyz monster with 2600 attack and 550 defense, requiring 2 level 4 Tellarknight monsters as material. While on the field, all face-up monsters on the field become dark. You can attach an Xyz material from this card and discard a card to special summon from your extra deck a light Tellarknight Xyz monster by using this face-up card you control as material. But also you can't Xyz summon other monsters for the rest of the turn. And this is also treated as an Xyz summon like Ptolemaeus. This effect becomes a quick effect if you have 7 or more Tellarknight monsters with different names in your grave. In the long run, this can actually end up being really nasty, because it could become a quick effect trigger on your opponent's turn, which means you get to bypass basically all the downsides while hitting your opponent at the most effective time. And even if it's not at quick effect speed, it still gets you into one of your 3 material Tellarknights with just 2 material and a discard. The Dark Attribute adjustment also gives you access to certain Xyz monsters you wouldn't have access to otherwise. For instance, Master Key Beetle. This card came out far too late to have an impact on the meta, but if it ever becomes relevant, I wouldn't be surprised if Centaur Mommy here became a big part of it. We've got the whole spectrum of Centaur-based parental figures here, which isn't what I expected from a non-tri-type deck. Tellarknight Constellar Caduceus is a rank 4 Spellcaster Xyz monster with 2500 attack and 1650 defense, requiring 2 or more level 4 monsters as material. If this card is Xyz summoned, you can target a Tellarknight card and or Constellar card in your grave and add them to your hand. You can banish a Tellarknight or Constellar monster from your hand or deck, then detach a material from this card, and this effect becomes that banished monster's activated effect when that monster is normal summoned. Okay, this card is absolutely nuts, no notes here. I don't think this makes a hybrid Tellarknight Constellar deck possible, but it does give some sweet stuff to both. In a Tellarknight deck, you can get 2 pickups by having either Altea or Lyra be the Constellar target, so any other Tellarknight card in your grave means this gets you 2 cards. And its detaching effect can be used not only to get your bread and butter combos going, but to use any utility effect you need. Heck, it's probably the best way to actually use your Zephyra monster effects. For Constellars, you can trigger the Sheraton or Zubena Shamali search, the from hand summons of Aldebaran, Algieti, Virgo, or Alresha, or get a little attack boost from Acubens. This feels like the card that'll be the glue that keeps either individual deck together moving forward, to say nothing of what strange crossover brews get made. Also, can we get a shout out for how this references the Zephyra cards, as Caduceus' sword has a blue diamond and the staff has a red one. It's the little things, really. Stellar Knight Constellar Diamond is a rank 5- No, I'm not doing the Simo meme, I already did it for Infernoids. Stellar Knight Constellar Diamond is a rank 5 Warmic Seas monster with 2700 attack and 2000 defense, requiring 3 or more level 5 light monsters as material. During your main phase 2, you can also Xyz summon this card by using a Tellarknight Xyz monster you control as Xyz material, except a copy of itself, following all the usual Chaos Xyz evolution rules. While this card has Xyz material, neither player can send cards from the deck to the grave, and any card that returns from the grave to the hand is banished instead. During either player's turn, when an opponent's dark monster activates its effects, you can detach an Xyz material from this card to negate that activation, and if you do, destroy it. This is a pretty fancy card that's got some great utility over a few formats. I'm sure we're all sick of seeing cards being sent from the deck to the grave right about now. Gosh, how many times can I mention Tirashizu in this video? And Diamond here is a 2700 point body that does that, on top of negating dark effects as long as they don't get chain blocked. Oh yeah, and this also punishes recovering cards from the grave to the hand, but keep in mind that this is reciprocal, so you won't want this on field when you go for the Xyz Caduceus. And the best part is, any level 4 deck has access to this now. Ptolemy can be made out of a minimum of 2 material, so during your main phase 2 you can just plop this on top. Or if you have 3 material to work with, you can just rank up into Diamond immediately, though it'll end up with less material. Or, in Tellarknight proper, you could make Dark Tellarknight Botlameus, but Diamond will end up with 1 less material. Or, if you're running Capella, you could just hard make it using its level modulation effect, but once again, that one seems pretty iffy. This is a pretty sweet Floodgate monster, and I look forward to its reintroduction into the meta as a way to combat grave-based and dark-centric decks. And with the return of Ptolemaeus, I suspect many players will find this to be a diamond in the rough. That does it for the Xyz monsters. Now it's time for the spells and traps. So Tellarknight Skybridge is a quick play spell card that targets a Tellarknight monster you control and special summons a Tellarknight monster with a different name from your deck. And if you do, shuffle the targeted monster into the deck. While the monster special summoned by this effect is face up on the field, you can't special summon monsters except Tellarknight monsters. This is another tool you can use to pivot into the Tellarknight monster of your choosing, either to help build up your core combo or grab you utility monsters. And as long as you Xyz summon with it ASAP, the restriction on it won't last very long. And as stated previously, this works wonders with Lyra. Just have it search Skybridge and you can turn Lyra into any Tellarknight you want. It's also good for a few niche scenarios. Because it's a quick play spell, you can bypass a number of restrictions that would normally limit your options, like using Skybridge during your opponent's end phase to summon Altair. It also gives you the chance to activate their effects more often, so you can get more value out of Alsame burns. And on top of that, the quick play nature means it can help you deal with targeted removal or effect negation, which I think is really dandy. What is with this game and printing absolutely busted bridge spell cards? Tellarknight and Crystal Beasts must have a lot to talk about. Tellarknight Genesis is a quick play spell card that destroys spell and trap cards on the field, equal to the number of other Tellarknight cards you control. Ah, equal. Gotta be careful about your numbers on this one, there is no wiggle room. Also, it checks Tellarknight cards, not just monsters. So if you have any face-up spell or trap cards resolving on the field when this card resolves, including Skybridge, it'll count that too. But it will end up hitting your own cards if you're not careful, as it doesn't specify it only destroys your opponent's cards. Genesis is an odd piece of support for the theme, but does deal with pesky back row, so it's not without some merit, especially as a one-of that's searchable off of Lyra. And if you're feeling like your game plan has fallen to pieces, Genesis can help pull yourself back together. Stellar Knight Alpha is an equipped spell that can only be equipped to a Tellarknight monster you control. It gains 500 attack and defense, and is unaffected by your opponent's card effects. But if you control a face-up monster that's not a Tellarknight monster, destroy this card. Ooh, this was really close to being good, not gonna lie. See, we don't want to equip this to our base Tellarknights, because they're really just supposed to be used as material. And once they do so, the equipped spell is going to fall off, so we're going to have to look towards our boss monsters to see who can benefit most. Delteros is pretty neat, turning into a 3000 attack body that can't be affected by your opponent on top of everything else it does, and Diamond goes to 3200 so it can stick around for longer. And if you do ever want to branch into off-theme monsters without losing this, Trivor can put this back in your hand to be used later when the coast is clear. But as nifty as it sounds, being unaffected by card effects is only going to be as strong as your opponent's lack of ability to deal with equipped spells, and that's not very tough to do. And while a 500 point boost is nice, once again, it being on an equipped spell is a huge liability. Combine this with the options this card limits, and I can start to see why this card never really got out of alpha. Tellarknight Constellar is a continuous spell card, and when this card is activated, you can special summon a Tellarknight or Constellar monster from your hand or grave. While on the field, you can target a Tellarknight or Constellar Xyz monster you control, and special summon from your extra deck a Tellarknight or Constellar Xyz monster with a different rank from that monster you control, using it as material. Now, this is a pretty sweet card. The on-activation effect is amazing enough on its own, giving you a way to either mobilize your monsters from hand or recover them from the grave. But it's also a free rank up or rank down magic every turn that gives both themes access to each other's Xyz monsters. Though be careful, it's not quite as flexible as it may appear to be. Because the monsters need to be of a different rank, you can't turn any of the rank 4 Tellarknights into each other, as well as Constellar Omega, Praecep, or the combo Caduceus. It should also be noted that Trivor, possibly one of our strongest Xyz, is still not splashable in Constellars because of its own restriction. But with all that in mind, we still have some kooky options. Any of the previously mentioned cards can become Pleiades or Ptolemy to bounce cards, or Diamond to get those sweet control effects. It can also even be used to rank change Diamond into Caduceus, which pulls double duty as removing the restriction that would hurt you off of Diamond while triggering the recovery effect from Xyz Caduceus. This also means Constellars can gain access to a wealth of Tellarknight cards, being able to go into Hyades to turn an opponent's entire board sideways before tagging into Delteros for a pop, or Xyz Caduceus for some recovery and extension. Trust me, I know I've had some harsh things to say about this card, but aside from some minor hiccups, this card really shoots for the stars. Hexa Tellarknight is a field spell card that gives each Tellarknight Xyz monster a 200 attack and defense boost for each material attached to it. And when a Tellarknight Xyz monster you control is targeted for an attack, you can send a Tellarknight card from your hand to the grave to negate that attack. So this can give your monsters a nifty boost. Because a lot of them need 3 material, this can give them upwards of 600 extra points. This puts Trivor at 2700 and Delteros at 3100, but I personally wouldn't dedicate spots in my deck for a boost like that, especially since all it does besides that is turn any Tellarknight card in hand into mini negate attacks. Seriously, what the heck were they thinking? Stellar Nova Wave is a continuous trap card, and once per turn during your main phase or your opponent's battle phase, you can special summon a Tellarknight monster from your hand. This one was actually pretty funky, giving you what amounted to a double summon on your turn and a way to throw out some chump blockers on your opponent's turn, all while getting their amazing effects. It's kind of like an escalation of the Monarchs, but way less rage-inducing. This is also another way to get all the benefits of cards like Altair without having to worry about those restrictions, as well as getting you extra effects on your opponent's turn. Use this to consistently increase your advantage, and your opponent will eventually have to wave goodbye to their chances of victory. Stellar Nova Alpha is a counter trap card, and when a Speller Trap card or monster effect is activated, you can send a face-up Tellarknight monster you control to the grave to negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. Then draw a card. This card was absolutely oppressive back in the day. Omni negates weren't quite as widespread as they are now, and on top of being able to stop anything, this also went value neutral, trading the counter trap for whatever your opponent played, and the sending cost with a draw. This allows you to convert any leftover Tellarknight monsters from your plays into a way to keep your board safe or your opponent's plans gummed up, and was even better when you sent the Xyz monsters away because those could float, which actually ended up getting you a +1. If a Tellarknight player ever got ahead and drew enough of these, it was almost impossible to get ahead. And while neutral trades like this are no longer as powerful as they once were, I still feel like it's an important card not only to this theme's toolbox, but to its identity as well. The only drawback is that this technically isn't an on-themed card, so you're not able to recycle it with Beetlejuice. Seriously, this is one of the few cards that would have been totally worth recycling with it, and it totally whiffs. This also implies that using the word Nova is a drawback, and I take personal offense to that. Honestly, it should make the card better. Alright, that's all the Tellarknight cards, but what do we do with them? Well, I think it's safe to say that we've got a lot of powerful control tools, so we might as well use them. Our goal is to steadily increase our card advantage while using our impressive toolbox to deal with a variety of situations, all the while whittling down our opponent's life points until there's nothing left but space dust. But what can we play to help them out? Well, picking the right rank 4 loadout for any given format is gonna be key. Abyss Dweller is a must-have at time of recording, with cards like Tornado Dragon, Bagooska, and Dugaris putting in some work as well. We also have access to the light exclusive Xyz monsters we talked about in the Constellar video, allowing us to pivot into Omega, Starliege, Star Seraph, and Bujinte Tsukuyomi. But if your opponent leaves a small monster in attack position, well, one of the best ways to ensure your opponent doesn't mess with you is that they don't have the ability to do anything at all. So you can take any 2 Tellarknights and make Utopia double, giving you access to a 10k monster to close things out. But if you don't want to run the possible brick of double or nothing, you have other options too. Because most of our monsters are warriors, you can make Heroic Challenger Excalibur or Blade Armor Ninja, both with their own strengths and weaknesses. Blade Armor can technically deal more damage and can attack multiple monsters if need be, but Excalibur can take out massive monsters all by itself. Though, if you have the room, you could just run both. Finding ways to summon our Tellarknights as often as possible is going to be key to our success. Back to the Front and Monster Reborn are both pretty neat, but a classic option has been Call of the Haunted. This gets any number of Tellarknights out of our grave and has some very fun interactions. See, Call of the Haunted self-destructs if the associated monster leaves the field, but if that monster is used as Xyz material, technically it didn't leave the field, but it is no longer a monster, which means it's no longer associated with Call of the Haunted, and vice versa. So it just kind of sticks around on the field until it gets destroyed by an effect. And that means it'll get bounced back to hand with Trigger, so you can do that all over again. But Call of the Haunted might have just been usurped, as it also got a bit of an update in Cyberstorm Access. Double hooking. It works largely the same, but requires a discard and summons up to 2 monsters. And they can even be in defense position. The bad news is that it works like Widespread Dud, where if either of the summoned monsters leave the field, double hooking gets destroyed, which in turn destroys the associated monsters. But there's the rub. It is otherwise worded exactly like Call of the Haunted, so you can get the on-summon effects of your Tellarknights, then overlay them to lose nothing. Then it can be triggered right back to the hand like usual, so you can do it all over again. And no, I am not convinced this is a coincidence. The Trap Trick Structure deck is built like a modern hat list. They know what they're doing. As a control deck, we have an obligation to see what floodgates work best with us. As a largely monotype and attribute deck, Gozen and Rivalry are, of course, fantastic. You might also want to consider running Artifact Scythe. Yeah, it's mercilessly unfun, but while it's legal, it is an option. By using Genesis, you can pop your own Scythe on your opponent's turn, and we can even bounce Scythe back to hand with Trigger to do it all over again. And while Link summoning isn't exactly our forte, very little keeps us from doing it. So if we don't need Trigger, we can make Dagda to make the process go a bit smoother. Not to mention that Sanctum fits right in with us. And bonus, we're already playing a ton of quick effect revival cards, so we can abuse Scythe with that too. The takeaway here is that you can get absolutely despicable with this card if you want to be. As for generic warrior support, Reinforcement of the Army is pretty good, while Warrior Returning Alive can be pretty useful for setting up Vega. Isolde is also another good setup tool for later turns, while potentially summoning another warrior to work with. Sending 4 equip spells is a bit much, but Fireflint Lady is only 1, and gives you a free hand summon. But what equip should we use? Well, even though Premature Burial is banned, Xyz Caduceus actually opened up the door for another card we can abuse, Different Dimension Reincarnation. It's less efficient thanks to the discard, but you are able to banish a Tellarknight of choice out of your deck using Xyz Cad's effect to mimic a normal summon, then bring that monster back with a DDR, which you can then loop with a Trigger summon. And any spare copies that are stranded in your deck can be used for Isolde summon effect. As for a silly tech pick, well, At first I was thinking Poker Knights, because they have a cycle of cards that get added back from your grave to your hand by shuffling Light Warriors from your grave back into your deck, but then I remembered that you actually want to keep those monsters in the grave to synergize with your effects. Also, the Phase Card Knights don't really bring anything to the table in terms of Teller Knights. If Arcana Knight Joker was good, that'd be a whole different take, but it's not, so it isn't. Not even for a joke. So instead, how about Obelisk the Tormentor? All of our monsters don't just have to be used as Xyz material, so as long as you can ensure you don't use Altair or Altea, you can tribute those monsters and proceed to swing with your giant untargetable monster. And with how easy it is to get more material, you'll have what you need to tribute for Obelisk's board wipe effect, and in turn, use their impressive suite of burn options to close out the game. And that's all I have to say about Teller Knights. I'd be surprised if the new additions were enough to help them break into the meta, especially with Bestials running around, but I would be pleasantly surprised. While I've had my bad memories facing down the deck, I still respect the powerful grind game and repeatability that makes every effect feel like a huge increase in value. So keep your head held high, because with the right timing, we can make this deck a complete Teller nightmare. Oh god, if those two themes cross over, I'm gonna lose it. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Will Teller Knights leave the competition starstruck, or are they a bit too spaced out? And which Xyz monster is your favorite? Honestly, I find the main deck ones to be a bit too samey, but Diamond looks radical. And make sure you like and subscribe so we can get to Akiza Explained at 50k, and share this video with someone you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode was brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commander Green Knight, Nebula Navigator's 3rd Dynasty, Adam Zajdel, Avi Chali, Kane Senpai, Cameron Berg, Chibi Gohan, Eric, Frankie, Genesis Yu-Gi-Oh!, Gloomba331, Great Big Pillock, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Howling Zangetsu, Iskander711, Ironic, John Manji, Julius Sneezer, Larakia, Manacharge, Marluxia is a Girl, Meteornus, Michael Madsen, Mighty Action X, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, Rem T Bright, RJ the Jank Monarch, Ruxith Sarani, Sophie, apparently, the Charizard Flame, the Fresh Prince of Conair, the Wizard Moose and Xander Wolfensberger, Cosmic Crusaders Ariel Kersey, Bear Shark Studios, Chaz Ghost, Chris Kessler, Corbinisms, Danny Bound, Emily, Eva Padilla, Herbal D, Jesus Garcia, Kale the Dragon, Carp, King Scarlet Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lord Whoop-De-Doo, Manga Pages, Marion James E. Picata, Matt Simmons, Neo Trinity 7, Nitromo, Sarah Lo Sulci, Shooting Star 3300, Star-Lord 777, Super Purd, Tucker Ordorn and the Legendary Raven, as well as the wonderful Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. I'm only able to continue doing this thanks to the support of these lovely people, so if you'd like to be a part of these credits, help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, and get all my videos just a little bit early, please check out my YouTube membership or Patreon links in the description to see if I have anything you'd like on offer. And if you haven't seen it yet, check out the video I made covering the other theme these new cards support, Constellars. And if you want to see two Yu-Gi tubers going at it, check out Noah Jenk and I's latest series Progression Polls, where your voice shapes the format. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.